In this video, I want to discuss the music of the Romantic era. The Romantic era roughly spans the time between 1820 to 1900. What I mean by Romanticism, I guess we have to talk about classical music a bit, is that classical music favors a sense of clarity and emotional restraint in its music. In general, whereas the romantic sensibility, particularly as it relates to music, strives for a more of an outpouring of emotions and creativity that delves into idealism and also fantasy. Music that means something, much like what a lot of music by Beethoven was striving for towards the end of his musical career. And I guess the Romanticism was in part, the movement in Romanticism is in part due to the rebellion to that age of reason with a more emphasis on expression. Some characteristics that you'll find in the Romantic era that maybe even bridge over into other romantic arts, that being the emphasis on emotion, as mentioned earlier, sense of imagination, where there's this intentional use of ambiguity within the music there in order to leave more imagination to the listener or the one who is interpreting the piece of art. Much of the music is autobiographical in nature, delving into the mind of the artist himself or herself, for that matter, to express something that's going on in the mind and not being so detached from the composer. And with this also an emphasis on individualism, that yes, there's some homages to previous composers, but more of putting the stamp of what makes that composer who he or she is in the Romantic period, that they have distinct characteristics in music that says that's Chopin music or that's Brahms music. Some favorite romantic topics, or at least where the music might have some relationships or inspiration from: the fantasy and the supernatural. You'll find a lot of music is influenced by this sense of the supernatural. Also, to go along with this whole label of Romanticism, the fascination with Middle Ages and chivalry, that women are this kind of great mystery to a lot of male composers, and unrequited love is a great topic in romantic music during this time. Getting lost in your feelings, and also nature itself. We talked a little bit about that with Beethoven, how not just a depiction of nature like in Vivaldi's Spring of the Spring Concerto, where it depicts birds singing and things like that, but nature in the sense that how it relates to the human spirit. Also, another aspects to consider in Romanticism is that it was the Industrial Revolution was going on at the same time, so there's a lot of social and economic changes going on, and people felt like getting away from this, those big factories, where big cities now were starting to pop up, and to get away into nature was a very romantic idea to them. Also, that with this Industrial Revolution, the piano itself, the instrument, was mass-produced, so that meant that music wasn't just for the privileged, but everyone, relatively speaking, could own a piano and partake in musical activities in the home. This is a list of some of the romantic composers. You notice how in the classical period we were more or less focused on Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. Not that they were the only three, but those were three that dominated the musical landscape during their time period. But during the Romantic period, it's a little bit more diversified, where you have all these different composers. There's Schubert, there's Schumann, both Robert and Clara Schumann, Hector Berlioz, Frédéric Chopin, Richard Wagner, Peter Tchaikovsky, Russian composer. Others like Franz Liszt, haven't even mentioned on this, Mendelssohn, Johannes Brahms, but a wider range of composers and styles that are much more distinct from one another. In the Romanticism in music, they still use some classical forms such as the sonata form and rondo forms, but they added their own individual touches to it. You start to see new forms like nocturnes or character pieces as well, but still with a lot of them use the ABA format and so forth. Symphonic composers also had a difficulty in living in the shadow of Beethoven, who had raised the bar of symphonic composition to such a degree that everyone was always being compared to Beethoven. Tone, color, dynamics, pitch ranges are greater. You'll see in musical notation that they use much more extremes, like the 4 Ps or 4 Fs, to bring out the most extreme pianos and the most extreme fortes. Harmony becomes much more complex, more emphasis on dissonances, use of diminished chords, and other types of dissonances as well. I mentioned earlier about the emphasis on individual style. Part of this had to do with a sense of nationalism in many composers. Edvard Grieg, a Norwegian composer, composed a lot of music based on Norwegian folk melodies. Franz Liszt composed many Hungarian folk melody pieces. And also exoticism, music relating to a foreign culture. Some musicians or composers were fascinated with music from other lands there, that influenced their music as well. You'll also hear a lot more program music in the Romantic period, where pieces start to have more descriptive titles, like the Dante Inferno, the symphony as well, and the Faust Symphony, all these descriptive titles even of instrumental works. Symphonie Fantastique is another one. A wider range of instruments brings about a greater variety in tone color, and the piano itself also overcame, or I shouldn't say overcame, but went through some changes where the hammers were covered with felt, and they produced a more singing tone compared to the forte pianos of the previous generation. And as far as Romanticism compared to Classicism, you get a more symmetrical feel in classical forms, where this tonic key move of stability to instability in a different key, and then return to the tonic key. There's some sense of resolution. But in Romantic forms, there's this relishing in the emotion of yearning for something. And they kind of like that instability here, where yes, they might start a piece in this tonic key of stability, but then they would move to another key that would represent that sense of yearning, and this would be more prolonged in comparison to the Romanticism, much more prolonged compared to the classical forms. And in fact, many times there were unresolved dissonances because there was this sensibility and appeal to that type of emotions and feelings in Romantic music.